Hey everyone, we're back again with some more Ableton Live tips and tricks. This week we're going to wrap it up a little bit. We've gone over most of the components of this step sequencer over the past couple of videos, and in this one we're going to cover some of the sound layering and sound selection techniques and just kind of the audio routing that wraps it all up. Alright, so let's get going. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is sound selection. Now, Live has a fairly good built-in library of different samples and sounds. You go to your library, samples, you can see there's a bunch of different stuff, like all the Akai samples they've got. If you've downloaded any sample packs or anything, like the Loop Masters things, these are here, different partner instruments, a bunch of different just single waveforms. See the drum components, all the individual different ones here. So you can really pull from these to start building your drum sounds. Now the other place you can go is just randomly search things on the internet. There are tons of people out there that produce sample packs themselves, and they give them out there for free. Whether these are field recordings or samples from hardware that they have, or synthesized effects, or just any other type of effect they have. A lot of people put together these packs that you can download for free, which are great. The other technique you can use is just to create them yourselves, whether that is field recording or taking things within Live, manipulating them, adding effects, and just kind of resampling them, getting that waveform, then importing those waveforms into your simpler or drum rack or whatever else you're using. Now, I like to use many different layers in my drum kits. This gives everything a bit of uniqueness, especially when you're using samples that everybody who owns Live has, and it also creates thickness in your sounds. Now, one of the most important things you can do before you start adding different components to your layers to create an overall sound is to pre-listen and screen the individual waveforms before you start adding them all together and having the blended sound. This might seem basic, but it's actually a key component that a lot of people overlook. When you have a certain sound in mind, the overall sound, the end sound, to blend with your track or your live set or the other song you're playing it with, whatever it's going to be, try to have a vision of what you want that to sound like, and then pre-screen the individual waveforms with that in mind, thinking about how they're going to fit in to that overall sound. This can save you a bunch of time at the end if you just randomly pick sounds and there's conflicting frequencies, or it's not quite exactly what you want, you're not sure where you went wrong and what part you should tweak to change it. That can take a lot of time. So just do a little bit of pre-screening, actively listening to all the waveforms beforehand, and it can save you a bunch of time. Now, one of the best tools you can use when layering a lot of sounds like this, especially for drum sounds, is using some sort of spectrum analysis. Now, I run these on the drum kit here. You can see it here in Live. It's actually just called Spectrum. It's under the Audio Effects tab, right there. And it basically just shows it's a visual representation of the audio that's playing. So, for example, if I fire up track here, it's muted so you can't hear it, but you can see what that sound looks like on the audio spectrum. And that can be very helpful when trying to layer sounds and determine what areas need to boost or cut or anything like that. And it's a great reference tool that you can use every step of the way, and it's just to make sure that it's exactly what you want. Once you have your sounds selected, you know what you want to do, they all kind of vibe together the general way that you want the overall sound to be. You can go in and start blending them through volume, gain stages, EQing, filters, all that sort of stuff. So if we take a look at this snare example again, you'll notice that the volume, the gain, for each of these individual sounds is adjusted. Now, when you're layering multiple sounds that occupy the same frequency range, you can get a lot of buildup, a lot of dynamic buildup. So you have one clap, it's a certain loudness. Add 2, 3, 4, 10 different claps to that, it just gets a lot louder. So in order to maintain good gain levels throughout the whole chain, you're going to want to adjust these and make sure that your VU meters are always, they're not in the red, they're not clipping, they're always in good standing. So the overall volume levels here can help with that. Now, the other component to that is filtering. Now, with snares in particular, because they occupy such a large frequency range, kind of in that mid-low to mid-high kind of spectrum, you want it to kind of occupy its own space. It's really easy for snares and claps to bleed into the kick drum area, and that just creates muddiness, takes away from the emphasis and the punch of the kick and the snare, and it just creates an overall muddy mix, especially when you're operating with so many layers. Like within the snare layer, there's all these different individual waveforms, and then within the kick layer, there's a bunch of different individual waveforms. So when you have all those residual harmonics in overlapping areas, it just creates a lot of muddiness. So what you can do is within the simpler instruments, there's actually a filter section you can apply. So as you can see here, in the claps, I've actually set a high pass filter on this so that it filters out everything below 500 hertz. Now within the snare, I wanted the snare maybe a bit meatier. Maybe I want that at 200 hertz. So there's a bit more low end to get the meat of it, but it cuts off well before the kind of bulk of a kick sound. Same with all the clicks. You can adjust these frequencies to individual levels based on those waveforms, but overall it just helps clean up the sound, reduces muddiness, and can actually help you control your overall gain staging and volume too, because it will cut out certain amounts of frequency. Once all your levels are good, your gain throughout the whole thing works, your EQ's dialed in to remove any unwanted kind of harmonic frequencies. The next thing you can do to help glue everything together with all these different layers is to use a bit of compression. Now, compression's a very tricky thing. There's tons of different ways you can apply it. There's lots of right ways, there's lots of wrong ways, depending on your particular track or the context in which you're using it. Now, for the snare one here, it's just to blend all of it together after all the EQ has been applied, after all the volume fades have been applied, to blend it in together. It's just to tie it in, and then also to control the overall output of it. So you can set your input threshold, you can see where your levels are coming on the output, and adjust your output gain accordingly so that the master output at the end of the chain is still not clipping. Compressions, again, is very, very important, but it's also very important to experiment. A lot of trial and error goes on. You just have to listen to your mix. There's no kind of stock formula you can use. Be like, okay, this is the snare drum, this is the compression I'm going to use for it. You really have to listen to it. Set up your monitors properly. Do it in an environment that lends itself to proper monitoring, and just listen to it. That's the best thing you can do. If it sounds good to you, it probably sounds good to somebody else, and you just have to go from there. Finally, let's talk about the audio routing of the drum track and how it gets sent and processed to the master output. So, as you can see, I have one of the sends on the drum track turned up all the way. Now, normally when you have your sends turned up, just by default, it will send that amount to its corresponding return track, but the output will also be blended with the individual track. Now, if you go to your in-out settings, you can see that I have selected audio to sends only. This means 100% of the audio coming from the drum track is going to be sent to the corresponding return track. in this case, I've created a return track that is exclusively for the processing of the drum sounds in the step sequencer. Now within this, the first stage that it goes through is a DJ effects rack. Now this is just there. This is something custom built that I've used for live performance settings. It's kind of based on my own style of doing stuff, effects that work for me in the way that I play live. So this is the first component it goes through, so you can tweak your drum sounds on the fly. The second stage is a limiter. Now, even though I've adjusted all of the gain settings and the filter settings and compression beforehand on individual layers, sometimes things happen, especially if there's any type of unexpected gain stage increase within this the DJ effects rack. So it's just good measure to have a soft limiter at the end of it, just to make sure there's no clipping and all your levels right till the end stay pristine. Now after this, I have a long reverb. Now it's pretty dry. It's not really wet. I put this after the limiter. Some people, the order of these, some people might want to play around with depending on personal taste, but this is the way that I like to do it. Now, this last reverb right at the end of it, just a little bit wet, is a last kind of glue, just a last kind of component to get all the different sounds together. Gives it a nice little wash over the top so that every single sound that comes out of it has that same kind of reverb tail on the end of it, and it just makes everything glue together across all the kits. My personal preference is for this kind of long reverb. You could go even more subtle than that and just make it a really close, small room reverb that's not necessarily perceptible, but just is there enough to glue it all together. So that's a little bit of an overview about the sound selection, the sound layering, and all the processes that happen along the way from the individual waveform through the racks, through the return tracks, all the way to the master output, and how all the sounds are made to glue together to make a cohesive instrument. The goal of showcasing the step sequencer was really just to highlight the way that all of Live's different effects and instruments can work together in different combinations very seamlessly, to showcase how flexible Live is as both a production suite and also as a live performance tool. Hopefully you learned something from this. Maybe you got inspired to build your own instruments. That was really the overall goal. This kind of wraps up the step sequencer part of everything. But next week I'll be back with another component, more exploration of Ableton Live, and hopefully you guys will get something out of that as also. So have a great week, and I'll see you next time. All right, bye.